What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek. He's Sodek. And this is Modern Monthly Metagame Update for December 2021. Let's go. Alrighty, so this is our first or second metagame update. First one was in November, and as of this video release, it's public for everyone on YouTube. So if you haven't watched it or you want your to show your friend how great our content is, but they don't have access to it, you can check it on our channel. It's public for everyone. Recommend it to your friends, family, and everyone else. It's great, as all of our content, as always. So, quick reminder, we've touched more in depth on how our tier list system works last time. If you need a little refresher or you didn't watch that video, here we go. A very, very quick explanation of that. Okay. So we've already went over our tier system in our first video, but thanks to Sodek's brilliant idea, we've decided to record this part as a separate segment that we'll just put in every tier list update, so it will be more convenient for those of you who are watching us for the first time to learn how we understand different letter grades given out to various decks. If you've already watched this segment in one of our previous videos, feel free to skip it because it was literally copied and pasted in the post-production and it's identical to its predecessor in our previous videos. Our biggest problem with the tier system was lack of meaning behind different tiers itself. Without a proper context, you can argue with your friend whether a certain deck is tier 1 or tier 2, only to find out that you both might meant the same thing by saying tier 1 or tier 2. But your understanding of what tier 1 or tier 2 mean were different. Because of that, it was vital for us to create a unified system as to avoid any misunderstandings. There are many qualities by which you can describe a deck, but we've decided to stick to two different axes: raw power and positioning. What do we mean by raw power? For example, a deck that presents a fast, stable combo kill backed up by multiple layers of interaction is a deck with high raw power. Living End comes to mind as such deck, thanks to being a one-card combo with a lot of cantrips and free interaction. Other archetypes that's high on this spectrum can be Murktide Regent. Consistent two-color mana base, a smattering of highest quality threats and answers, and great sideboard options speak for themselves. How about a deck with low raw power level then? Well, it's harder to find those decks in a format as powerful as Modern, and previously we did have Mill as an example of a low raw power level deck, but I think that's actually Burn that suits that description the best. It is doing the same rather unimpressive thing every game. Its cards are not great individually, just look at Shard Volley or Skullcrack, and the strategy is easy to hate out, but it can be a contextually strong choice in the right metagame. Hence our use of two axes to better describe the overall strength of any given deck. To distinguish between decks that are lower and higher on the raw power spectrum, we are using terms bad decks and good decks, respectively. Notice that both of those adjectives are in quotation marks, and they are not the only factor when it comes to the overall quality of the archetype in question. A low raw power level deck can be good or even great choice on a weekend, and those words are just making it easier for us to communicate with you and each other. Second axis is positioning, and here the description is much more straightforward. Decks that are low on this metric are poorly positioned, and decks that are high are well positioned. When it comes to tiers, we've decided to split our tier list into 4 different tiers: S, A, B, and C. S tier is fairly obvious. It's just best deck, or decks at the moment. Sometimes it will be one deck, sometimes multiple, and other times there won't be any S tier decks. As far as A, B, and C tiers go, those rough guidelines will help you understand what we mean by those tiers. Most of the time, A tier decks are both high in raw power and well positioned. B tier decks are good on one of those axes but low on the other one. So for example, If Living End, a deck that I've already deemed as a really strong deck in terms of raw power, is poorly positioned, it will end up being in B tier most of the time. Conversely, if the metagame is favorable for Burn, a low power rebel deck, it will also end up in the B tier. And sometimes, if it's extremely well positioned, it can even end up in the A tier. Keep in mind that those cases of low powered decks in A tier will be few and far between and won't happen more than a couple weekends per year for any given archetype. And then the C tier decks are, in our opinion, irredeemable under certain conditions that are true in the format at any given point. To sum it all up, we've prepared this handy dandy TLDR for you. So, to recap, S tier decks are best deck or best decks in the format. A tier decks are either well positioned good decks or very well positioned bad decks. B tier decks are either poorly positioned good decks or well positioned bad decks. And finally, C tier are poorly positioned bad decks. Note that those guidelines are not always true, and sometimes a high raw power level deck, such as Living End, might end up in a C tier if it's really poorly positioned, according to us. Or that not every deck in B tier is either high on raw power and low on positioning and the other way around. Sometimes there will be a deck that's mediocre on both of those axes and it will end up being in a B tier anyways. Thanks for watching this explanatory segment and let's jump right back into the video.
Okay, so let's go to our current trends, maybe not our, but the metagame trends. And this month was quite interesting to analyze because there was a lot of going on. And we have like 8 points to talk about. The first one is that Blue-Red Murktide is officially back. Last month, like we recorded the November metagame update just before when Murktide found the way to come back in the Sea of Solitudes, and thanks to partly because of uh, good deck building and rebuilding the deck so it can handle Solitude decks better. And second, to the meta being more open, Murktide found a way to become a top deck yet again. Outside that, there's also Hammer as a extremely powerful deck which can't be stopped probably, like ever, and to some extent for Color Pile.
I do agree that I do think that Murktide and Hammer both found their way around the most commonly played interaction. For example, I think that Thoughtseize is a big part of Hammer right now, especially when you are playing Thoughtseize alongside Dark Confidant against like Solitude decks. You can, or I guess with Dark Confidant it's even more important against Fury decks. You can take away their Fury and establish Dark Confidant. And Murktide with its Jace Divine Sculptor plus Blood Moon sideboard plan and the adaption, or once re-adaption, let's say, of Force of Negation. Just both of those decks are extremely powerful and they just found the way to beat up on things that were popular. So it only makes sense that they are back on top.
Okay, moving on. Another return. It's a Grixis Shadow Rise. And I don't know exactly why, but Grixis Shadow started to be a thing yet again. Thanks probably to Corey Baumeister and other like good players who started playing the deck. And as a result, players started to again play other Grixis versions of the deck, Grixis Control or Grixis Tempo with Dragon's Rage Channelers, but without Shadow. So for now, we have a lot of different Shadow builds around, and once again, people are trying to figure out what's the best. Jędrek, maybe you know which one is the best.
Okay, so it won't come as a surprise to anybody. I still don't really like the Shadow Zay card. I do think that people have finally seen what's the biggest problem with Death Shadow? Because it never was, as I've said multiple times, it never was Solitude. It never was anything like that. It was making subpar deck building choices because you needed to accommodate for Shadow. For example, you don't want to play a bunch of Thoughtseizes and Shocklands in a burn and red tempo deck heavy metagame. So for example, like how bad is Death Shadow as a card against like Murktide, for example? Because you will, or Unholy Heat Darcy decks, because your Death Shadow will be in this very uncomfortable position when it's either it's getting killed by Unholy Heat for 1 mana, or you are low enough on life total that like one hit with Darcy and Bolt kills you, and Darcy flies, you can't block with Death Shadow. So it's like there's almost no room for Death Shadow's pilot life total to be correct in this matchup, unless you know that they won't have Bolt and you have a counter magic. But if you have a large creature and removal / counter magic for what they have, you will win anyways. So I'm not thrilled about that. The Solitude issue, as I've said, is pretty easily redeemable because people finally realize that instead of crying, I have 2 Death Shadows and they Solitude one of them and the other one died, you can just not play second Death Shadow against a Solitude deck and you can just have one on board, which is not very hard to figure out, but it took some time for people to do that.
It's actually hard. Like it took me some time to realize
the best player. Yeah, it was it's been similar against blue-white control decks for years. Like you just play one creature against Supreme Verdict deck, and now you play one creature against Solitude deck, and it's very similar philosophy. So I do think that it's good that people are coming back to Grixis, because I think those cards you can play in Grixis are extraordinarily strong. Like if you have to list top 10 cards in the format, it's pretty likely that Ragavan, Unholy Heat, and Expressive Iteration are amongst them. So you can just play those strong cards. You can also play Lurrus, which is the strongest companion by far. So I think it only makes sense, especially when people want to play Death Shadow. You do want to have removal spell that takes care of Death Shadow regardless of its size. So you want to play Drown in the Lock, you want to play Terminate, you want to play maybe Fatal Push, because people have been going to like a singleton Fatal Push once again. So I do think that Grixis is in a pretty great spot right now. We will talk about it later on as well, but that's just a fact. Grixis is back. Some would say it never left, like me, but we are here and there, and
at least the people's attention are against on the exactly. Grixis. So as Amulet, another deck that wasn't very popular in the last 2 months, but thanks to not random winning by bad good players, but to a new card called
Cultivator Colossus.
Thanks. It's yet again popular. Is Colossus a very good addition to the Amulet deck? Maybe not great, but reasonable enough to convince some of the top Amulet players to play it as maybe 3 or 2 copies in the main deck. So it could count as a payoff spell number 9, 10, 11, something that Amulet desperately needed earlier. Do you have any ideas about Amulet?
I guess a bit. I do think that Cultivator Colossus is pretty good. I still see some people playing Karn. For example, the Saturday challenge was won by Big JC00, I think, is the Amulet player. And they are still playing Karn. And I do think that there are some merits to play Karn, but mostly when people are not choosing right hate cards. So, for example, if you want to beat Amulet with like Ethergast and Dress Down, Karn is good, because Dress Down is really good against Colossus as well. But if you will play Subtlety, for example, Subtlety is good against creatures and Karn. And I know that that Arilax likes Karn in Amulet, because Colossus has the same problem as Titan which is you are mulligan a bunch, you have no Amulet, low resource draw, and then Colossus does nothing, while Karn is a great like middle priced card, and it makes Grazer better because you can just Karn quite fast. So I do think that that Cultivator Colossus is still better than Karn personally, but I do think there are reasons to play Karn. Especially as long as people are not playing subtleties but Ether Gusts or Dress Downs against Amulet. So for example, if Grixis decks are popular and you can't play subtlety with Lurrus, then maybe Karn is a good way to combat Grixis decks. Who knows?
Okay, moving on. Is Dredge back? That's the good question I was asking myself. And apparently, in my opinion, yes, it is back. Why? Firstly, because finally the good build was found. I can shamelessly say that I found a good core for the main deck. By that I mean everything except mana base. So playing 5 color with Team Discovery, Reunion, and Otherworldly Gates, which is absolutely, in my opinion, was the way to go. But the mana base had to be found and the right cyber plan. And Violent Outburst, the player who ended in finals of Sunday Modern Challenge with Dredge, popularized the idea. And right now, there are a lot of Dredge on MPGO, and the height will rise, and that's quite sad. But overall, when I was playing Dredge, like in the last week, and I was playing it a lot because I really like it, I felt the power, and the deck was powerful enough to come back. So, in my opinion, Dredge will be a solid tier 2 deck going forward after like after people realize that they don't need to play 6 copies of Grave Hate and only 3 are usually good enough. Okay, moving on.
I do want to
Well,
say that I
oh,
was
me too.
actually the person who suggested you to just play 12 Rainbow Lands and some split of Fast Lands.
Yeah,
And you were
that
skeptical of that?
yeah, I was playing 12 Rainbow Fastlands at first, but I had wrong Fastlands. Then I started playing Fetchland, and the mana base was good, but it was very painful either. And you said that, oh, maybe you should play what, like we saw, uh, maybe not in Outburst list, but it's someone else's with 3 Blackleaf Cliffs, and this was game changer in my opinion because Darulast is so OP right now. But we'll talk about it later in the
Yes.
metagame trends. Moving on, where are Cascade decks? They should be really well positioned in our opinion, but both Living
Well,
Hand and Rhinos aren't really
yeah,
there.
it's kind of weird because Chalice is way less popular than it was, at least as a main deck card, and people are not that high on Cascade. Uh, I do think that there are still a lot of Teferi Time Travelers in the format. And it
Yeah,
definitely hurts Living End more than it hurts Rhinos because Rhinos is a like mid-range tempo deck more than a combo deck. Like if they have I've lost multiple games against Rhinos with Teferi plus Chalice on board, and it can't really happen against Living End, all that realistic.
true.
So uh, I am kinda surprised that people are not playing Cascade, but especially Rhinos. But I still think that Rhinos are a good choice right now. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe just a uh,
Maybe it's just a
a matter
variance
of
thing.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
variance or matter of time to sit back. Okay, moving forward. Forward? Okay. Top tier combos around. Like the deck called Blue White Urza, played by Contra Ego. I just wanted to say that it's cool, and in my opinion, it just lacks enough players to show real results. Jędrek probably does not agree with me.
I don't want to. I don't have anything to say about it, but I wanted to take 5 seconds of your life to say to tell you that I don't have anything to say about it.
Okay, cool. Moving on. About the decks that are the losers of this month. I can safely say about 3 of them, and one is a total loser. The 3 of them are Belcher, Burn, and Living End. All of mentioned decks have a rough time beating dedicated hate, for example, like Burn, or the rise of blue-red Ragavan decks in form of Grixis or Murktide, for example, Belcher or Living End. And there are also other minor things that are happening in the metagame. For example, for the Burn, the Amulet rise, Burn struggles against Amulet, uh, and so on and so on. Overall, it like last 2 weeks were not a good moment to play either of these decks. Will it change in the near future? I kind of feel that Belcher can be good once Murktide could be hated out a bit by hammers, for example, or other like decks that are good enough to stop it. About Burn and Livington, I'm not that sure, and we'll just see how the metagame will develop.
Yeah, I do think that Belcher definitely was a deck that caught people by surprise even twice, which is kind of weird because like in a span of like I don't think it was a month between both of those. Like you won the showcase or you won the challenge and you
Yes.
just dumpstered all blue-white decks you faced, and then like a month later, Belcher wins 2 tournaments in one weekend, dumpster every blue-white deck they've seen, and like blue-white people just didn't learn anything. It was kind of silly. But
Yeah.
I do think that now people realize that they need some forces of negation in their deck.
Yeah, there's much more of them around.
Yes,
Like
and
also
that's kind of
Murktide
hard for
decks.
Belcher.
Yeah, also Murktide decks are playing forces. All 4 color piles are playing forces,
Yeah,
and so on. So
exactly.
it's much harder to play a
Yeah,
spell based combo.
yeah. About Living End, I do think that Dredge being somewhat back is not a great thing for Living End because it's probably the Living End versus Dredge matchup is probably favorable for Dredge, right?
Yes.
And
Mainly because of Ox of Agonos. If
yeah,
you have Ox, you can rebuild better than the opponent.
and your opponent will have more graveyard hate because of Dredge, so that's not nice. And finally, Burn. I do think that Burn, or as I've said many times, Burn is getting. It's pretty easy to hate out. You just need to play like 2 or 3 sideboard cards for Burn, and it should be enough if you have a reasonable plan against them otherwise. And I do think one of the most violent, despicable things that ever happened in Magic is putting Core Firewalker in your Cascade sideboard to just to just cascade into them like Rhinos do.
Uh,
At least the 4 color
actually,
Rhinos deck. And by vile
actually,
and despicable, I mean it's very effective. So
like about being effective, like yesterday I was playing Dredge, and I was playing versus 4 color Rhinos. I even had Lane of Sanctity to play around Endurance. I was like so relaxed, like I
and they
can lose.
cascaded into Sanctifier.
No, they just main deck play Rest in Peace. Like just play for turn 2 into Cascade into another Rest in Peace into Cascade into Rhinos. So they just decided to pack both Rest in Peace and Rhinos, and it was
Wow,
good enough to stop me.
wow,
Like
that's that's pretty nice, I
yeah,
guess. At
that's
least for the 4 color Rhinos with main deck Rest in Peace player. Okay, and finally, one last point we have is Esper Reanimator. What's up with that deck? Or
Zakas.
what's not up with that deck? Rather, because we haven't seen it at all in November. So we just dropped it from our tier list because it's never been a super exciting deck in my opinion. It had some moments, of course, and it was a deck you needed to respect at some point, but those times are gone at this point, and maybe we will come back to it being okay. But especially now with once again Dredge on a rise and people packing more graveyard hate, like it's just not a time for Reanimator.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. And now we will go to our main segment in which we talk about tier lists, numbers, results, letters, grades, and everything else you people love so much. So let's go. Okay, so now, as we've said before, we are in the tier list section of this video. So without further ado, the first deck that we have on is 4-color. Both Blink and the Kahira deck, even though this portrait in the middle suggests Blink, we are basically merging those two, even though there are two different decks, obviously. But if you are playing Omnath and Ren and Six and Teferi Hero of the Minaria, or Time Raveler rather, and Evoke Elementals, this is where you're at. This is your deck. And we feel about it, we feel pretty strong about it, right? We both have it in our A tiers. So, like, anything you want to add about it?
Like, you can't go really wrong by playing the most powerful cards in the format. So overall, I don't think it will go very much lower. Like, if you have enough time and resources, by I mean ticks or dollars or any other currency you're using to build this deck, it's very safe to just go for it. It's very strong in my opinion.
Yeah, it's not the best choice in Poland when we need to spend all our money for pierogis, especially during winter, because we will freeze to death. Other way, because there are obviously polar bears and stuff like this in Poland.
Yeah.
Moving on, we have another deck that we already talked about, and it's Amulet. How do you feel about Amulet deck right now?
By now, I feel it will like I saw it too many times when the good linear decks are growing in popularity, more people are playing them, and the metagame decides to not ever lose to this deck again. So they pack hate cards and the deck drops in popularity. So this is a typical sine wave effect. And Amulet, thanks to Cultivate the Colossus, was a deck of the week and was played more and more. And I really feel that the deck with Cultivated Colossus is better. But good cards are still really good about to stop the deck. We even recorded a whole segment like last week about the Amulet. So if you are interested how to build it, why it's good, whatever, just check it out. Overall, I think that the deck is still solid, but in the next month it can be hated out a bit. So for me, it's a solid B tier.
Okay, I do agree with Sodek. And by the way, if you want to see the Amulet video, the link will be right there. Because thanks to YouTube Magic. And in my opinion, I do agree with Sodek. It's a B tier deck for me as well. My biggest issue with Amulet, as I've said last week, I think, is that both Murktide and Hammer are really good against Amulet, and I don't think you can find a consistent way to beat those decks. Rather, you can have Force of Nature against, Force of Vigor against Hammer, and it's definitely good. But Hammer will still kill you probably faster than you would kill Hammer usually, and they do have Thoughtseize. And Murktide is just a pile of counter spells, Clock and Blood Moon. So this matchup, I think, is just irredeemable, and it's nothing you can. Like, it's not a hopeless matchup you will never win, but I don't think you can ever make your Murktide matchup good as Amulet unless you are willing to sacrifice, like, I don't know, probably the whole integrity of your main deck. Like, you just have to be pre-boarded for Murktide with a very heavy anti-Murktide measures, and it might not even be enough.
I still think it won't be that you will win more.
So unless you are very experienced or very whitelisted player with Amulet, don't play Amulet into Murktide metagame. Okay, moving forward, we do have Belcherino. Sodex, one of Sodex's pet decks, uh,
Yep.
which is sadly not doing so well this time around.
And why it's that? It's because the Belcher, like we said with Amulet, the decks are in cycling effects, and the Belcher right now is, in my opinion, at the lowest possible moment for the archetype because the deck was doing well for a long time, even longer than I expected. But finally, instead of more counter spells and Archmage's charms, people are not that greedy anymore. We are playing more Force of Negations, and this is the main reason, in my opinion, that the deck fell of popularity a bit. It's still a really good one. There's the arguments to play it. For example, there are, like Blood Moon is still a really good card in the metagame. Maybe not that much because of both Hammer and Murktide being high, and Blood Moon is not very good against them. But with right matchups, you can still easily take out the tournament. But if you want to win your, for example, next Modern Challenge or another tournament you want to play, I would probably avoid playing Belcher for now. Just wait like a couple of weeks and surprise the meta, like every other combo deck should do. Just don't try to hit the wall with your own head. There was probably some idiom about it, and I don't.
Uh, Bashing your head on a wall, something like this, I think.
Okay, so I was
Uh,
close enough.
yeah, so uh, I do think that the move to Force of Negation was crucial, as Sodek said. Also, people have been cutting their Fluster Storms from the sideboard and adding Forces instead, or Spell Pierces. Spell Pierce is also much better than Fluster Storm against Belcher.
Yeah.
And I also have another interesting question to you, I guess, because I was listening to my favorite podcast, Dominor's Judgment, as always, every week. They are great. Check them out. And uh, Arilax has been playing a bit of Belcher, and he said that, in his opinion, Blood Moon is not a good main deck card in the deck because he would like to focus more on comboing people. And I think he's playing
So
main deck Veil of Summer in this slot. And do you have any input other than just laughing?
okay, so like at first you want to say, yeah, I want to be more focused on the combo. Like I was like, okay, so there are builds, for example, with Wild Cantor to speed up the deck a bit, even if you are opening yourself into removal, but at least your turn to recruit will happen more often. And then you say that they are playing Veil of Summer main deck to be more open. I don't feel that's possible. Like I think that people are valuing Blood Moon in Belcher by thinking about Blood Moon in another deck, and that's not the case because in Belcher, Blood Moon does not need to completely lock the opponent. All the Blood Moon needs to do is to slow them down a bit, so your one shot kill will kill them. So, for example, if you are playing versus blue white control, it never was like okay, sometimes you can play turn to Blood Moon and win, an opponent will not have any basic around. It's more like they are fetching for blue sources, but they will have only two blue sources left. That means that if your Blood Moon resolves, they will never play Archmage's Charm, they will not be able to play Teferi, they will not be able to play Counterspell plus Counterspell, and so on. Blood Moon is not meant in Belcher to lock the opponent out. It's just another fast way to get a random win, but also a way to win a slower game later on. Also, in my opinion, Blood Moon is good in Belcher because it actively helps you playing your lands untapped, which is all maybe not always, but quite often a thing to consider. Uh, Overall, I can see meta games when I would not play Blood Moon main deck, but then I would like to most likely play it in the side. Overall, if you want to play something safe that will be good in the deck, I would probably go for Blood Moons. Right now, when I was playing Belcher, I was playing 3 Pact of Negations, 3 Blood Moons, 3 Strike Reach, and this build was the like it looked for me as the best one. But like in your game one, you still want to do just your one thing. So having that cards in hand, especially in one card combo decks, is not the biggest deal. So it's more about packing enough interactive cards you want to play instead of playing in your 75 instead of playing exactly cards in your main deck or sideboard. Comparing to Veil of Summer, Blood Moon is just much more white, and thanks to Ritual, you can play it on turn 2, so you can lock or slow down much more decks compared to other Blood Moon decks.
Okay, so if you fall asleep for a second, just like I did,
Like
here's
this is
a
that.
here's a quick TLDR. Blood Moon is more of a way to constrain your opponent's resources and slow them down than a lock piece in the deck. And finally, Sodek, one last question. What's your grade for Belcher?
I said this month that it's a B, but it's more like a B because I strongly believe the deck is just really powerful, not about the current position. And I feel that your position will be more accurate just for
Yeah,
for
I do
this
think
moment of
that
the game.
Belcher is a C deck this month because I don't think it's a particularly powerful deck. Like, for example, I do think that Living End is much more powerful combo deck than Belcher. And as Sodek already said, I'm not thrilled with Belcher's position right now. So it was a fairly easy C to me. Okay, moving on. We have Burn. What do we think of Burn, Sodek?
Bern will always do the same. The question is this the same? Is good enough to win tournaments? In my opinion, right now, it's not enough because enough people have responses to Bern. Enough people lost enough matches of Magic the Gathering game. Magic, it's probably better to say that. To respect the deck, and Burn players should wait a bit to play the deck again. Personally, I would avoid it right now. Maybe in like 2-3 weeks from now, when people will focus more on Hammer and Murktide, Burn can be back again.
So, okay, that's an easy C for Sodek, easy C for me. Not much else to add against Burn. And we can move on to another C deck, at least in the name, Creativity, which is conversely also a C deck, in my opinion. But Sodek has it in B tier. And now maybe Sodek would like to defend it because, in my opinion, there are no redeemable qualities about the deck right now, and no reason, in my opinion, to play it over 4 color.
To be honest, like sometimes uh, you just want a deck to be good. Like I put Belcher on B, even if I know that's not very well positioned. And I have a similar feelings about Creativity. I feel the power is there. I feel like it had some strong results. For example, finals is in Las Vegas, or some modern challenge to pace. I'm not exactly sure which one, but I remember that I saw something like that, or Mana Trader series. So the deck has power level to compete. The question is how your terrible mana base made on all mountains, duals, and Dwarfenmires can be good enough to compete in the metagame. Uh, Overall, I feel that still, like compared to other decks, not enough players are playing the deck to to show its real power. And once there will be more creativity players, the results should come, in my opinion.
All right. I don't believe in most of that stuff that they just said, to be honest. I don't think creativity is very good. But I guess we'll see. Moving forward, we have Sodex's new/old love, Dredge. And uh, before Sodex starts his monologue, I would just say that, in my opinion, Dredge is pretty good. I do like the list that is currently popular. I do think you should put uh, more like importance on being an explosive deck rather than being a deck with a good late game engine like um, Life from the Loam was, because you don't really win games with Life from the Low Bloodgust anymore when people are playing main deck endurances and stuff like that. Plus, it's very hard to win those longer games against stuff like Omnath, Fury. You'll just
Solitude.
Solitude. You will just not grind through those mid-range piles or control piles, however you want to call them. So I do like this decision to go as fast as possible and as explosive as possible, and that's why I put Dredge in a B tier. I can obviously see it being an A tier deck possibly at some point, but I think for now Dredge is just a too new, or like new in quotation marks, obviously, toy or deck to play, uh, that people will respect it accordingly and will have hate cards. Anything else you want to add, Sodek, about Dredge?
OMG. Okay, can you mute yourself? I'm starting the monologue. Okay, about the Dredge. Uh, I still believe it's a choice you shouldn't take all the time. And like it will sound very strange, but uh, in my opinion, Dredge has very good matchups and very bad matchups. And there aren't any good ways to solve bad matchups outside drawing your 10 free kills, which happen from time to time, but it's really hard to build the whole strategy around them. But the current build is playing 12 Dredgers, and 4 of them are Dark Blasts. Dark Blast, in my opinion, uh, are super well positioned thanks to all Ragavans DLCs around. And mm, also because there are a lot of X4 creatures that will be dead in combat after Price Tabagon or Silver Smoke go deals combat damage to them. For example, Endurance, Omnat, Rhino Token, Yawgmoth, and we can maybe find a few others. Overall, in my opinion, Darvas is super well positioned, and this is the main reason why you want to play versus Ragavan decks. So, for example, Grixis, for example, Murktide. For example, like these are two the biggest examples. Uh, there are also like black red, all Lurrus decks, like black red, Jant, and so on. Like as long as opponent has targets for Darkblast, your matchup will by definition be good. Maybe not. Okay, Hammer is the only exception, but you are not losing to Hammer most of the time. You are losing to hate cards, and even Hammer is cutting Sanctifiers. They are not playing like automatically 4 copies. They are playing 2, sometimes even 1. So you can just accept that you will lose like 1 out of 5 games post cyber because they will just draw it, but win the rest of them with Darvas killing Esper Sentinel, Mem Knight, Inkpot Nexus, and even Pure Steel if you are tricky enough to play upkeep into main deck Darblast. And Ancient Grudge just solves the one problem the deck has before sideboard called Shadow Spear. Once you destroy Shadow Spear, the deck isn't that threatening, assuming they don't have Sanctifier, of course. And just because the matchup versus Murktide and Grixis is so good, also the matchup versus For Color is good because uh, the deck is designed to build early to present early power. Also, for color decks are not playing that many grave hate cards, and they sometimes have Yorion, so they won't see their grave hate that often. So with one good Yorion, you can just win the game on turn 2 because you can flip like 2 amalgams one whatever, and you force them to have Solitude plus Ephemerate to even start the conversation, but then you can still just play Ox and still overpower them. On the other hand, we have a few bad matchups. By bad matchups, I mean Amulet. Amulet is popular, and you don't want to play versus Amulet all the time. Matchup versus Yawgmoth is kind of challenging. Matchup versus Belcher, but Belcher is not on the rise, so that's cool. And outside all of that, you will still lose to players who will just decide to not lose to you. So the more Dredge is around, the more haters you'll see. And like I said, Dredge you shouldn't play Dredge all the time, because even if in your local meta, like, people will start packing 5, 4 Gravehate cards, and you will just have a very hard time winning post sideboard. But in like 2 weeks from now, the hate should go lower, and I feel that Dredge will just stay as a solid B tier, and this is my rate too. I can see Dredge being A tier from time to time when people just don't respect it at all. But overall, it's just a fine solution deck to the heavy Ragavan meta.
Okay. I don't know about you, but personally, when Sodek was talking all this boring stuff about Dredge, I was busy ordering for Tormod script on card market.
Good decision.
I'm obviously joking, but I do think that it's true that Dredge is very good against most Grixis decks, especially unprepared Grixis deck. I do think that not playing Darcy makes you better against Dredge, because you have 4 not 8 targets for Dark Blast, and with non-Darcy builds you can easily sideboard out all Ragavans and transform into a deck that's not really that vulnerable to Dark Blast. But yeah, it's still an uphill battle, even if you are playing like a more controlish builds. Probably the best version of Grixis against Dredge is Death Shadow, because Death Shadow is a big creature that can block well and can be killed with Dark Blast, but it's still not great.
Actually, I would play. I would rather play versus Grixis than versus Control, mostly because Grixis decks can't side out all the creatures, so they will have targets for Dark Blast. Plus, they are actively losing life to cast the Shadow, so
True.
you can just in your mid game, I will top deck Reunion Effect, flip 2 free chills, and win the game.
That's true.
And-
Okay, speaking of Grixis the Shadow, there we go. Our newest addition to the tier list. One of the 2 additions this month. The other one will remain secret for the time being. And as we said already, Grixis the Shadow is a very popular deck right now. And I do think that people will, ironically, I guess, move away from the card Death Shadow because they are supposed to do so. It's not a very good card because of all those things I've said before. You need to make subpar deck building choices because you want to play Death Shadow, and instead you can just play good cards. And like the subpar deck building choices aren't even cards like Dress Down, which are pretty good, and you actually want to play Dress Down in the main deck from time to time now. I am playing one Dress Down in Control right now, and I do think it's a defensible main deck card. But for example, I don't think you want to play 4 Thoughtseize. I don't think you want to play no fast lands. I do think you are just building your deck to lose against a bunch of a bunch of popular decks. So once again, I'm not a fan of Death Shadow as a card. I am a big fan of Grixis decks in general. I don't think there's denying that Death Shadow is Death Shadow is a strong strategy. I think that Grixis control is better, but not by much, because you are still playing all those powerful cards in Death Shadow. And I do like the deck right now, even though I like the control deck more. So it's an A tier deck for me. it's a B tier deck for Sodek, I think. I think Sodek is
Yeah, yeah.
not a
Uh,
big fan. And do you have anything else to add, Sodek?
I just posted it in B because I like after all these months I don't understand why Shadow is better than no Shadow, and that's why it's lower. Overall, I feel that Grixis builds uh, are more and more played, and that's cool. I like the position. I still don't know if DLC is needed or not, but Jendrik will tell you because now we are talking about regular Grixis. What do you think about the deck,
We
Jendrik?
do. Uh, I've said most of the stuff I already wanted to say. So even though Sodek is pretending to fall asleep, there won't be anything I really want to add. I do think that Grixis is great. I do like my current list. Um, I am back to streaming also, and you can find me playing this deck uh, twice per week, I think. I will also play other decks, but I've played Grixis last Monday. And yeah, I don't think you need to play Death Shadow, as I've already said. I do think that playing for Consider is great. I think Consider is really good. It makes your Snapcaster mages much better, and it's something I undervalued in the past. Having more cheap spells is great, and Considers makes your Unholy Hit better because you have more surveil effects and you have more cheap spells, and you will find your Delirium or the Delirium relevant types faster. Also, I'm playing more discard spells. In general, the deck is a bit more lower to the ground right now. I really do like this build, and it's a solid A tier deck for me, as it always was. And now Sodek will tell you why it's a not really an A tier deck, and it's a B tier or C tier even deck in his opinion. Or Sodek.
Or not, because I feel that the current results are showing that Grixis is real. Grixis kinda solves the problems for the current metagame, and it has a game against nearly everything. Like I said, I'm not mid-range slash control specialist, so I just believe that Jendrik is right here, and I think he is. Uh, but I still think the deck is in A tier position, and if you want to play Grixis, do it. Uh, you will have a fun time playing it.
Wow, that's one hell of an endorsement from Sodek. So now we know that Greece is the best deck in the format, even though the next thing we'll talk about is Hameruni, our first ever S tier
OMG.
S tier deck.
Okay, about the deck. The deck looked solved in like last 2 months. Like not that many uh, was changing at that time, and suddenly players like top hammer players started to toy with other things. So, for example, we started to see Falsies main deck. So we started to see Dark Confidant main deck, and the most uh, I'd say maybe not aggressive, but the most revolutionary list from Laplacian even didn't have Ornithopters, which was like it was a sacred cow. Like you need to play 0 mana artifacts to make your curse better, etc., etc. But Laplacian said, "Yeah, fuck it. I will just play better cards than Ornithopter," and they played just more interaction. They even played Portable Hall. What's that? I don't understand it, but I'm not winning with the deck Laplace is, and I think that not trying to be as fast as possible is a good way to go because against deck without interaction, you can still turn free them. It's not impossible to kill turn free. And just have your Sigurd as a draw or play Hammer early mm, with Mishra's Bubble or Mem Knight, and you should be fine.
Yeah,
And
I do agree that uh, like cutting Ornithopters, for example, and weakening your pure steel draws is mostly irrelevant in the games you need to win fast. I guess turn 1 8 Ornithopter, turn 2 Hammer is one of the ways to win on turn 3, but so is turn 1 Memnite, turn 2 Hammer, or turn 1 Sigardas 8, turn 3 Animate Nexus kill you with Hammer. So I do think that those decks, like, you're not giving back or giving up too much of this fast kills equity, but you are getting much better at fighting through hate, which is pretty important.
And I was talking to Laplacian, and he said that not playing Ornithopter meant that they could they were much better equipped in playing versus 4-color decks versus all solid decks or Murktide decks, etc. etc. I was asking them why they kept Memnite instead of Ornithopter, because like at first I was like, okay, if you want to attack, it's probably easier to attack with Ornithopter, and after blocks before damage, use the hammer from Sigarda side. But he said that Memnite is just a much better card because it trades with Ragavan. So if you are playing this attrition battle, you can just trade. If opponent plays Teferi minus with Ornithopter on the battlefield, it's safe and can go up. With Memnite on the battlefield, it will be gone. So Teferi will do the stuff, but it won't do much more than that.
Unless you bounce Memnite.
Unless, but I assume you're bouncing Urza Saga or whatever.
Something else, literally anything else.
Yeah. So Memnite looks better even if it does not fly. Sure, it's still not the only version. We can see also other takes, like with only 3 Ornithopters, with 4 Ornithopters, even decks without Lurrus, but with more nettle cysts, sort of fire and ice, sort of war and peace, whatever. All these decks have one thing in common: they fucking rock, and the deck is so powerful that it can overpower bad matchups or hate cards. For example, Force of Vigor. It's not like it won't stop Hammer for forever. It will stop them for like 1 or 2 turns. That's it, because they will most likely find another Hammer and attack again. And Hammer still has a reasonable matchup versus Murktide. I don't want to say that it's really good because it was good in the past, but with the changed build, it goes closer to 50-50. I don't know how's about Grixis matchup. It's like hard. Like Control should be good because it has more Colagans commands, but for example, Grixis Shadow without Colagans commands.
I do think that Grixis control is favored against Hammer, but there are definitely very reasonable ways for Hammer to win the matchup still. So, like, I'm not surprised when I lose against Hammer. I do expect to win more often than I lose, by quite significant margin. I would say, like, I don't know. I hate percentages, but I don't, whatever 60-65%, I think. But especially if you are playing against a very skilled Hammer opponent, it's sometimes hard to win. Ironically enough, I did play against Laplacian in Warsaw last weekend, and I do think that if I was playing against any other Hammer player on the planet, I would lose game 1 in our matchup, and I won because Laplacian was just playing so cautiously. Like, I literally was passing the turn with 5 mana open, and my head was nothing. It was like 3 lands, Snapcaster Mage, second Snapcaster Mage, and Iteration that I didn't cast, or something like this. And I was just looking for a way to deal with their stuff. And Laplacian was just, okay, so I will attack you for 1 with Ink of Nexus, and I will play Ingenious Smith or something. Because he was like, we are talking after the game, and I was like, man, why didn't you attack me? And he was like, yeah, because I thought you had like regular Grixis stuff, like, I don't know, heat, drowns, both of them in hand, something like this. And I just wanted to press my advantage in a more safe way. And I was like, sure, that makes sense. But I like in this, of course, I think Laplacian would have played it in the same way if we got paired against each other once again, because uh, this was a pretty rare scenario that I just didn't draw any removal spells in top, I don't know, 15 cards or something like this. It doesn't really happen. So yeah, that was just a funny anecdote, I guess. But yeah, I do think that Grixis is good against Hammer, at least Grixis control, but I do think that Hammer has very real ways to win against you. Okay,
Okay.
do you want to move forward?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, next up we have Jan Saga, and I don't have much to say about Jan Saga. I'm still not a big fan of red black Lurrus decks without blue because you are significantly worse against 4 color. That's my opinion, and that's why Jan Saga, in my opinion, is a B tier deck at best.
Yeah, I also have it on a B tier too. Overall, I still feel that Tarmogoyf is a beast in the deck, and there are ways to build the deck differently. We saw the very interesting list last week that had Ignoble Hierarch, something that solves the problem from John Saga for having a, a, a shaky mana base with Urza's Saga and with very colored spells to cast. Um, we also were talking on our Polish podcast about why DSC, like Dragon's Rage Channeler, shouldn't be played in Jan Saga, and the more I think about it, the more I like it. Maybe there's a build
You more like the concept of not playing it or the card in the deck?
of not playing Dragon's Rage
Okay.
Channeler.
Okay.
And I think that this may be the future of the archetype, like playing it as hierarchs, especially that, like, okay, you are still it's a still extremely poor play versus Vren on a draw. But outside that, there aren't many things that were punishing X1 creatures in the past. For example, there is no lava dart around. And the upside is pretty high. So maybe that's just the future. And we'll see. Overall, I think the deck is fine. In my opinion, it's much better than the red black version. And I don't know why people are playing red black over
I
Jan
have
Saga.
no idea as well. It's
Like
so puzzling to me.
maybe it's because of the mana base and because how Turach is really good.
Well, you can play
Because of
Turak in Saga.
yeah, but you need to support your mana better. Maybe without DRC, maybe you'll be able to play like two Turages main deck.
I don't think it's
Maybe
that
just
hard to play. For example, like Airborg in Saga. You can play Airborg, and then you can
yeah,
play like maybe. I know that some Jan Saga lists in the past played Expedition map to just train sagas. Maybe you can, you play Saga, find Expedition map, and if you have like a Turak lying around, and you really want to kick it, you will just use Airborg. I don't know.
yeah, like
Airborg
protecting from
might be actually be a pretty good card in Jan Saga in general because then you can make colored mana with your sagas. I don't know. It might be a good land in the deck.
maybe I don't have an experience
Yeah,
with that, so hard to say.
neither do I, but just a thought. Um, and also, I do think that the big reason for people playing red black is that Aspiring Spike likes the deck, and
Okay, moving on.
it's kind of funny. Yeah, right now we will talk about red black later on, I guess. Moving on, we have Living End, another of Sodek's favorite decks, but this month, surprisingly, I am higher on Living End than Sodek is because I have Living End in B tier and Sodek has Living End all the way down in the C tier. I've already been outspoken with how much I admire Living End as a raw power level deck. I do think that good Living End draws are basically unbeatable for anything, or like obviously there are a combination of cards that win against best living end draws, but for the most part, a turn 3 Wrath of God plus put 20 power in play with Grief and Force of Negation.
This 20 power is like 10 power too much if you want to cast it on turn 3.
Okay, your nut draw is, I guess, okay, so of course your nut draw is 4 Street Raves, but if you go like...
My Natros is probably Grief, Raven Winder into Waker into something. So it's okay, with a Natro you have like 15 plus power.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you have like Grief into 3 River Winders or 2 River Winders and Curator of Mysteries, like what type of blue cascades, blue cyclers for 1 mana have you? Have 4 River Winders and...
Raven Wonders. Raven Wonders have the most power. It's 5 power.
And then 4 Curators?
For Curators and for Architects of Will, which are...
Okay, so even if you go like, I don't know, so on average you have 4 power in those cycles. So if you go average 3 times 4 is 12, then you have 1 Grief and 1 Street Rave, it's 18, and you can assume your opponent shocked. So you are putting a lethal board with, and you rough the board beforehand, and you have Force of Negation backup, and then you Focus your opponent as well. So like the deck is undeniably insanely strong in
the
so-called
deck
vacuum.
is really good.
But
the deck is very good, but there's a metagame too. And that's the problem. Like there's one big reason to play Living Hand. It's Hammer. With Hammer around, Living Hand, it's one of the Living Hand's best matchups. It's like Jedrek hate percentage, but if I would say 70-30 for Living Hand, I probably would be quite close. Like I don't remember when I lost to Hammer when I was playing Living Hand. The matter, like you have just Wrath of God, some cyclers, and some forward interaction. Even if the interaction isn't the best and the most efficient most of the time, because of, for example, Foundation Breaker, 2 mana Shatter on sorcery speed, but the position is cool. But there are also other things that are quite poor. Murktide being at the top with a cheap creatures and a bunch of counter spells. It's like it's really hard to beat through all of them. Also, 4-color decks are still playing Teferi, but they are also playing Force of Negation right now, so it's harder to catch them off guard, and they are just prepared for all these spell-based combo matchups. Grixis decks are around. It's not like Grixis the worst matchup ever, but it's an maybe not uphill battle. Like you can easily lose to Grixis if they play Ragavan, attack you twice, and have mana open with 2 counters. You just never win. Plus, they are more higher and higher on hate cards thanks to Dredge being in the again. Also, Livings and best matchups, for example, like spell-based combo like Belcher. Rhinos are also kind a lower bit, are not around. So overall, Amulet is also a good matchup for Living Hand. So maybe with the rise of Amulet, Living Hand can be good. Like the matchup are quite polarized. You still have your good draws, but so as opponents. And with so many counter spells around in the metagame, I'm not the biggest fan of the deck right now.
Yep. Just to add my few cents on the Grixis matchup, I do think it's close, and I do think it's up to Grixis on how we aggressively you mulligan, because you have 4 good ways to for like pillars that are good against Living End, which is tempo, card advantage or counter magic, discard spells, and graveyard hate. And if you open a hand with 2 or 3 out of those 4, you will win most of the time. But if you open a hand with like 1 or 2 and they have grief, it's quite easy for you to lose. So
Yeah, like
I think the matchup is close. I think if you are prepared, you will win. But if you don't mulligan enough, or if you don't have the right tools, you can very easily lose the matchup. Okay, moving forward, we are coming to the second addition to our tier list this month, and it's Merfolk. That's what I wanted to do. So you already got a little spoiler with Silver Juice Adept in Sodec C tier, so you know what's up.
About Merfolk, there was a time when Merfolk player ended in finals of Modern Showcase, and people were like, "OMG, the new build of Merfolk, no Mutavaults, 4 subtleties, Archmage's Charms, Revolution for Merfolks." And for a second, I was quite high on the deck, and after that, my friends started playing it, and they were saying that the deck fucking sucks, and that's the end of story for Merfolk. I
Okay.
think this is the biggest scam of the new technology of decks. Uh, Merfolk has some good matchups. For example, uh, technically, like I heard, I was not playing it. The matchup versus Hammer is probably good, but I don't know exactly why. I can believe that matchup versus Amulet can be good with for subtleties, another counter magic. Uh, I don't know about Grixis, like I feel that you just trade and play Lurrus and that's the end of story.
Basically, Merfolk can't really beat Ragavan on the draw. Like if you play turn one Ragavan against Merfolk, they can't beat it. So it's kind of sad watching them trying. And I do think that once again, Ari and Dom were talking about Merfolk and or more specifically Merfolk versus Hammer, and Merfolk apparently do have enough like small interactions that lines up profitably against Hammer that the matchup is quite close. Like for example, you have Tide Shaper against Urza Saga, or you have Merfolk Trickster killing Saga tokens, or you have like sideboarded thieving Skydivers or Archmage's Charm. And I can imagine that Merfolk versus Hammer is a close matchup. And I do think that Merfolk against Amulet with 4 subtleties is pretty great. But as once again, my favorite person to quote, Relax said at some point, like I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, there is no amount of East Coast GP wins by Merfolk that would prove to me that Merfolk are a playable deck. So I will agree with Sodek, and we both have Merfolk in C tier. Just even though the list is quite revolutionary, I do like that Tulio Jody is experimenting, but I also would like to say that I know that from Canister, because Canister has been helping Bamzing recently with collecting data from challenges. So Canister is just watching all the replays and watching all the standings. And Tulio Jody is usually like 3 and 3 in the challenges with Merfolk or something like this. So sometimes you just get a good day for your deck. Got lucky with pairings, got lucky with draws, and overall Merfolk is not the best choice. Moving on to our next, not a very good choice, starting with the letter M, is Mill. And it's a short story. There was already a space here because I messed up and I swapped Merfolk and Mill for Sadek, so you knew that
Nice.
another C deck is coming. And it's Mill. Not much to say, I think, right? Like, Mill is just not great against decks like Murktide, for example. If
Like
you
it's good versus Hammer if you draw Tasha's hit with Rafter. If you don't draw it, then you lose.
and now Hammer has forces to even
Yeah,
take your Tasha's Hideous Laughter. So you
yeah, and
basically need to
about
top deck Tasha's Hideous Laughter now against
yeah,
Hammer
like
quite often.
there are some things you maybe can do. For example, matchup versus Amulet should be good. But matchup versus Grixis looks kinda hopeless. Even for color decks have more tools to not lose to random mill effect. So I just don't see there's enough reasons to play mill. Overall, I like the deck, I like the concept, but not at this moment.
Yeah, I do think that Mill versus Grixis is favorable for Grixis, but not super favorable, at least with control. I do think Death Shadow is really good against Mill.
Yeah, Death Shadow or DRC even.
Yeah,
like,
but basically, if you have a turn 1 creature and you interact with their stuff, it's just very hard to
it
lose.
should be, yeah.
Uh,
Should be fair.
so not much more to add about Mill. Moving on, we finally have everybody's least favorite, unless you are named Aspiring Spike, version of Lurrus, which is red-black. And to surprise of actually literally no one here, we both have red-black and C tier. We are just not the fans of red blacks on this podcast. Red black is, in my opinion, still decisively the worst version of Lurrus. I just don't get the appeal of playing stuff like Den of the Bugbear, which is not a bad card, but it's just not enough for me. Like,
Okay.
for me, the biggest,
Mhm.
for me, the biggest appeal to play red black over other red black X decks was always Blood Moon. And you can't play Blood Moon with Lurrus. So that's it. That's it for me. You can still play all the good cards that are in red black in other versions if you really want to. You can play Dotty Voidwalker in Grixis. You can play Kroxa in Grixis. You can play Turak in Grixis. You can play all those cards and not like handicap yourself with losing access to really strong cards. Like, you can get access to Renin 6 for a very low cost of splashing green to your deck. Or you can get Drown in the Lock and Expressive Iteration for a similarly low cost. Like, I just don't get the appeal of not splashing for this card and instead, oh, I can play Urborg, oh, I can play Shinka, or I can play Shizo or any other land that you have in your mana base for little reason, basically. just please don't play red black. I
Okay.
really respect Aspiring Spike, but I have no idea why he's still playing this deck. Like, in my opinion, it's just so garbo. Sadek?
Okay, about red black, I do believe that there's one version of red black that's at least interesting and at least it can have results. And it's not red black Lurrus. It's red black grief slash fury slash things that will make me cheat my
Or
elemental into play.
as we would say in Poland, erbe sztuczka.
Herba sztuczka to jest najlepsza nazwa.
Yeah. So basically,
And
you are playing Evoke Elementals and, like, I don't know, 10 ways to give it
only got
Undying
12.
or something else, like, similar to Undying. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I do think that, I do agree with you, Sadek, that this is at least a different way to approach things and potentially okay deck.
With Seasoned Pyro, with Blood Moon, with better, okay, maybe not better mana because you need to sacrifice your lands to play Malakith Rebirth as a black source, which
Yeah,
enters the
the mana
battlefield tapped.
base in the list that top 8'd the challenge or the showcase, I don't remember, or the PTQ, I think it was PTQ, was
Yeah.
truly abysmal, but the concept of the deck is definitely interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's my opinion, it's really good. Like, you can even cheat Kroxa. Cheating Kroxa is kind of cool too. So you have like a critical mass of these effects that have like will work by
Well,
itself, but
you can't cheat Croxa. You can get a trigger off of Croxa, but you can't cheat it into play.
okay, because you're casting it.
Yeah, like,
Still,
if that was the case, you would see a lot of unearthing on Uro back in the day. You would just play Uro with unearth, and you would just have Uro for 1 mana, and it would be
okay.
insane.
Let's hope that will never come back as an idea even. And overall, I think that that this take on red black has better tools to fight the meta. Although you are attacking the meta from much different perspective, you are not trying to play small creatures and try to tempo the opponent without any other better cards, but you are trying to play a more controlled prison route. And I like it. And I think, assuming more players will start playing it, we'll talk about this deck more later on.
Okay, moving forward, we have probably the best, or definitely the best Cascade deck to play right now, which is, unsurprisingly, Rhinos. It's been a bit quiet for Rhinos, definitely in the last couple of weeks. but they are still showing up from time to time. Maybe not as much as before. But I think both Sodek and I still have faith in Rhinos or enough faith to put them in our A tiers, respectively. With the caveat, last month, as you could see, there were both Rhinos, the Rag Rhinos and Jaw Rhinos, alongside each other, and we've decided to just cover it to, or like to shrink it to just Rhinos, and then we will tell you each month which version is better in our opinion right now. And for the first time, I think, in the history of our channel, we do agree that Rag Rhinos are better than 4-color Rhinos. Is that true, Sodek?
Kinda, like I really like Blood Mooning, and like I saw versions with, like you said earlier, like a month ago, playing Rhinos with Blood Moon. Someone actually started playing it,
Yeah,
and
I think it
it
was
works.
Gigi, I think.
Yeah, probably. And once you starting playing Blood Moon, and you have more Force of Negations, like more, you see them more often because you have 16 or 80 cards. It solves some problems with other matchups. Still, like when we see about the current top decks like Hammer, Murktide, 4-color, and Grixis, mm, I wouldn't say Rhinos are like a strong favorite against anyone here.
Yeah, I do think that Rhinos is actually one of the toughest matchup for Grixis. I do think that
Okay.
Tron is Green Tron is the only like truly bad matchup for Grixis in my opinion. Like that, if somebody asks me what are bad matchups for Grixis, I would always say Tron and just Tron because it's the only matchup I firmly believe that is really bad. But I do think that Rhinos are favored against Grixis, not by much, but it's the deck I am definitely losing to the most, other than Tron. But Tron is not seen
You
in a way.
surprised me actually. I was not
Well, I definitely
expecting
made
that.
some changes to make myself worse against Rhinos in the last few weeks because, for example, I have no Flusterstorms right now because now I have sideboarded Thoughtseizes instead. I am not playing main deck explosives because I'm playing Dresdown instead, which is better against most of what's going on right now. And I'm pleased with the
Not
change, but
Rhinos.
it's worse against Rhinos. And for example, I was playing in Warsaw against Wojtek Kowalczuk, also known as Xerk from Magic Online, or Zerk, I guess. Pretty skilled Magic player. He was playing Rhinos, and I just drew main deck Dresdown instead of explosives, and he beat me quite easily. So I do think that Rhinos are still very powerful as a deck. And I do think that as long as you are not running into precisely blue-white, or with main deck Blood Moons, you can even play against blue-white, I guess. I
Kind
do
of.
think that your biggest issue is still Hammer and the card Murktide Regent. Like, if you're playing against blue-red and they are not drawing Regent, or you deal with their Regents, it's fine. But Murktide Regent draws off of blue-red and Hammer are your two biggest problems in my opinion.
Overall, I think that Rhinos is a good deck to beat random stuff. So, for example, like
True.
like all these mentioned decks, maybe not all. Like in my opinion, Grixis maybe it's not that good versus random stuff. It can randomly find like play against Tron or any other deck that abuses something that can be problematic. But Hammer, Murktide, even for color, they are better. There's random stuff, and so is Rhinos. And if you want to just pick one deck and master it, Rhinos is, in my opinion, very safe choice. And you probably said that earlier, like a
Exactly.
month ago.
You have a
And
very very good anti-nonsense draws with like you just basically no matter what your opponent is playing, you can always fire ice or ice their land into Rhinos, or blood moon them into Rhinos, or fury them into Rhinos, or do anything that's good. I guess like if any of those fire ice, fury, blood moon stuff is good against your opponent, then you can follow it by 2 or 3 turn clock, and it's just really good. Moving on, we do have Tron, the Grixis only true bad matchup, but luckily for the lovers of swamps, mountains, and islands like me, Tron is
Not me.
not great right now. I don't think there is much to say about Tron. It's just an AC tier for both of us. It's basically you still have similar problems to Amulet, I think, in which you are bad against Hammer and you are bad against Murktide when they have Blood Moon, or Alpine Moon for that matter. Uh, and you don't have any new printings that can really help you. So,
True. Like
yep.
I think Tron had a moment to shine when For Color was ruling the modern, and playing Tron was reasonable there. Right now, metagame once again going into faster route, going more into tempo, not into card advantage, and it's not a good sign for Tron players. And in my opinion, you should avoid the deck right now.
Yeah. And even the matchup that historically was considered by many people for some reason favorable for or unfavorable for Tron, but actually was favorable for Tron, which is Merfolk, because every Merfolk player, uh, like 5 years ago, would tell you, "Oh, Merfolk is so good against Tron because I have spreading seas," and then you were talking to actual great Merfolk players, and they were saying, "Nah, matchup is pretty bad because they will just O-stone you or whatever, and you can't kill them fast enough." Right now, I do think that Merfolk might be favored against Tron
With
because
subtlety,
subtlety is so good in the matchup.
yeah.
And if you manage to cast actually hard cast subtlety, and then you just have uh, Vial on free, and you have either
Glassful
hardcast,
Mimic.
you can either hardcast another subtlety next turn or Glasspool Mimic with the Vial. It's just they can't
Game
cast
over.
a single threat.
Yeah.
And okay, Ulamog will answer two of your things, but you will still counter it, and you have clock on the board because you have just 20 creatures in your deck. So I do think that Merfolk might be good right now against Tron, but I'm not sure because I haven't played the deck. Because why would I? Moving on, we do have the former Ed, I guess, maybe a bit of a present king of modern, which is Blue Red. Murktide, another deck in the S tier for Sodek and for me as well. What do you want to tell us about Murktide Sodek?
Like this is a similar situation than Hammer. Like I was thinking that the deck is solved, but multiplayers uh, told me that that's not true, and they found ways to beat the biggest problems, most likely Solitude. And there's like the more decks are around, the better. The better Murktide is. For example, like with uh, like Belcher, Amulet, and other random decks being around, it's a good moment to play Murktide because Murktide had like one or two problems, and the more decks are playing in the format, the fewer chances you have to play against those problematic matchups. And even if you are playing versus them, the new technology in a more control heavy planeswalker package mm, is doing the work. For instance, Doom Switch, probably Doom. I never know exactly which Doom guy is playing what.
Doom Switch is playing Murktide and Doomwave is
Yeah,
playing
Doom Switch was
Rhinos.
Doom Switch was playing Murktide, and he started playing Jace the Mind Sculptor, the card that was a bit forgotten in the after the Holy Hit print, but it's really good in these heavy attrition battles because you have counter spells, so you can trade upon mana with opponents' expensive threats. For example, opponent plays Omnath for 4 mana, you counter spell it, then you can do something else. For example, you can play Murktide plus counter spell, or you can just make land drops, play Jace, and start winning on card advantage. And in my opinion, the finding of this Planeswalker package was the biggest reason why Murktide started to be a thing yet again. Like
Yeah,
Mhm.
to be honest, Jace was played in Murktide in the beginning, but I think it was kind of dropped because blue-white and similar decks weren't super popular back then, and Mirror was all about Murktide, the card itself, and you couldn't really resolve Jace in the Mirror all that easily. And even though it was good against Hammer, it still wasn't as good as a pile of explosives, I guess. I know that Get Smart, for example, has always liked Mind Sculptor in the sideboard, but I know that Doomswitch was maybe playing 1, maybe 0. And even if Jace was always lurking somewhere in the deck, I do think that the switch to Blood Moons also with instead of more Alpine ones was neat, because now you have, instead of like 1 or 0 or 1 cards you can push through and they need to counter, like Blood Moon and Jace, now you have like 3 or 4 of them. So post board you have way more cards they really need to counter. So that's pretty neat. Okay. Moving on, we do have the deck that made all of that shifts happen basically, or necessary, which is blue-white. Blue-white has been mostly played by people who don't want or can't afford to play 4-color, kinda, and then Wafotapa, because Wafotapa plays Blood Moon, even though he's been playing Murktide recently. But I do think that blue-white is pretty okay. It still has a really solid matchup against stuff like Cascade decks. You will win a lot against less experienced Grixis Death Shadow players. Like, if your Grixis Death Shadow opponent is not really experienced and can't play the matchup well, you will get a bunch of blowouts with Solitude, with Verdict, with stuff like that. But against experienced, like for example, if you're playing blue-white against people like Soulstrong, who has been crushing Modo recently with Grixis Death Shadow, or against Cory Baumeister, as Sodek already mentioned before. Definitely less thrilled about playing against those people with blue-white, because blue-white, as always, is pretty exploitable. And I am not super thrilled about blue-white right now. I think it's a solid B tier deck. I don't think it's terrible, but it's also not something I actively want to play. How about this deck?
I'm not a fan of blue white. Like I feel that if you want to play this type of deck, you should nearly always play Omnat. So that's why I posted blue white in the C tier. Not because the deck is not powerful. It's more as a strong signal that you should not take this route, and there are better ways to control.
Okay.
To play control. Sorry.
And
Overall,
finally,
okay.
you wanted to say something?
Overall, like I feel that Cherries, like the like blue white was a thing mostly because Cherries was really well positioned, but now with not that many cascade decks around, with more adaptations from Hammer side, with more Colagans command, Cherries is not that good, and without Cherries, with just pile of random things, I don't like. I feel that blue white is a bit too clunky to be considered as a top tier. Still, solid deck,
I can
but
see
like
that. Okay,
you
so
can see.
last, and I guess for some of us, in a one of the least, is Yawgmoth.
Pam.
Yawgmoth is a deck that, especially Sodek, has been quite high on uh, recently, at least among two of us. And I did share some of its excitement last month. I even played a league with a deck. I went for N1 and was quite surprised with how reasonable the deck was. And if I remember correctly, last time Sodek has it in A tier, which
Yeah.
seems super high for me. But even though I had it in B tier myself, but this time around we both move it down a notch. Sodek has it in B, and I do have it in C. So why I do have it in C? I think that the most important reason is that people have been playing Unholy Heat back. Like the Unholy Heat was probably at its lowest last month, and now
Mm-hmm.
it's back to being fairly popular. And Yawgmoth against Heat is not a great matchup. Young Wolf against Ragavan is phenomenal matchup on the other hand. But if you do manage to kill or interact with your opponent's stuff, and uh, if you just cut down on their resources, Yawgmoth is a very resource heavy deck. Like you need resources to either cast Eldritch Evolution or cast Chord of Calling or have your Yawgmoth do anything. Because if you have like 3 mana and Wall of Roots into play, okay, you'll Eldritch Evolution for Yawgmoth and then you have Yawgmoth with no creatures. What are they doing? They will just unholy hit it. Also, the rise in the popularity of Dress Down is not doing Yawgmoth any favors because now they can just Dress Down plus Unholy Heat even if you have board full of creatures. So that's not great. Now, overall, I'm not excited about playing Yawgmoth. I do think that also Yawgmoth is pretty bad against Amulet, probably. I would say. It's hard to kill Titan.
The more I think about these last two decks we were talking about, the more I think you are right. The blue white should be in B and the Yawgmoth should be in C. I, s- I still believe the Yawgmoth's raw power and the like your abilities to play around stuff is quite incredible, and I'm still high on the deck. But I also feel that the skill acquired to play the deck and have results is very very high, and I think that the deck, like, you need to learn a lot to be able to play the deck at the highest level. Although like there are not very easy decks around anymore, like nearly every deck from this metagame trends update it's not very easy to play. You need to just learn and spend enough time with the archetype to just feel the power, feel what to do. I think among all of these decks, I feel that the Yawgmoth is one of the hardest to master and to
I don't know
navigate in
about
these
that.
combat turns. Sorry?
I don't know about that. I do think that Hammer is the hardest deck to master.
Yeah,
I
but
think Hammer is really hard. Like if
yeah,
we,
Hammer is extremely hard, but on the other hand, the raw power of the deck means that sometimes you can make the mistake and come back.
that's true.
And
That's true. And yeah, there are definitely some decks like, for example, I play a bunch of League of Legends, and there are also like different curve of learning with different champions. And there are some champions that you can play 3 games on, and you will basically know what's going on. Uh, like play 3 games, watch a 15 minutes video, and you are probably good to go. And there are some champions in which you have to play hundreds of games before you can get really good at them. And I do think there are some of those easy, like the equivalents of those champions. Like for example, I do think that if you play one league on Modo with Tron and you have somebody who knows how to play Tron talk to you about it for 15 minutes, you will play a good Tron game. Like somebody will just say, tell to you, okay, this is how you sideboard, and you should mulligan aggressively and do this in this matchup, and it takes you 10 or 15 minutes. You play one league to see how it goes, and then you are good to go for a GP, for example. Uh, it's probably, I would say, other than that, one of the easiest decks here. As you said, all of those decks are fairly complicated. I would say that
I would say the living can is reasonably easy
yeah,
to play.
I was meaning to say that I think Living End is fairly straightforward to play. I do think that Merfolk are fairly straightforward. Uh, maybe Mill? Question mark? You don't
I
think
don't
Mill is
think so.
easy?
I'll make me a bit, and too many games are ending with like just you're very close to winning, and then you're starting to analyze what you did wrong, and
Okay.
then you find enough crap triggers, enough ways you could navigate the turn to find this
Okay. I
extra
know. I maybe I am
6 cards.
underselling how hard Mill is because this part of playing Magic has always been very natural to me. Like sequencing your card correctly has always been something that I was pretty good at, and it never required much effort from me to do that well.
Okay,
But yeah,
about easy decks.
yeah.
What
Go
do you
ahead.
think about playing 4 color blink deck? I think it's reasonably straightforward.
Yes,
You
I
just
do
play
think so as well.
your good
I think
cards
Blue White
and
is fairly straightforward too. I do think out of those decks, the decks that are really hard to play, I do think that Amulet is really hard to play on a highest level. I do think that Hammer is really hard to play. I do think that those two are probably in my like S tier of hard of difficulty. Then in my A tier, I would have Belcher, especially when it comes to recross. I would have Grixis. I would have Murktide, maybe Rhinos.
and
Uh,
Yawgmoth.
no, I think Yawgmoth is below that. I think Yawgmoth is like uh, similar to
OMG, Jędrek, I have an idea. We need
yes,
to make a video about difficulty of decks.
maybe we will we'll see. Okay, yeah, I think that's all. I think that's all we have wanted to say. Uh, as always, you know the drill. You can find all the links below. If you are here for the first time when this video becomes public at the beginning of 2022,
OMG.
OMG, you can find our Patreon below, so you can support us there and get access to those videos the second they got released. There are links to our Twitch pages, Twitter pages, everything else. And yep, that's it. We'll see you next week with a new topic that's a surprise. And by surprise, I mean that we don't know yet what we're gonna talk about.
It will be super cool.
It will be super cool, as every piece of content we ever made was. So, yep. Once again, thanks for watching this. I won't say overly lengthy because it will be around 20-25 minutes shorter than the last one of those. So
You know that
I'm pretty
what's
proud
this?
of us. I'm pretty proud.
What's this? This is a progress.
This is
We
a
made a
progress.
progress. So maybe the next video will be even shorter and even more.
I don't think it's possible. Like, it's really hard. We have how many decks here?
25.
Like 19? Yeah, we have 19 decks, and
19, okay.
we were talking on average 4 minutes about a deck. It's not long. 4 minutes for a deck is not long.
Yeah, and
So-
then we have pet decks to talk about.
Yeah.
Which
Okay.
good.
We don't want to add much more time on top of it as to keep our progress going. So thanks once again. We'll see you next week. Take care. Have a lovely weekend. Bye bye.
Bye.